much on behalf of all of Canada, we would like to formally apologize to the nation of India for what our Prime Minister, what our government has done. It's really not good. Everything, all these accusations, all these allegations, none of this should have been made public. And it's blowing up in Canada's face, specifically in Justin Trudeau's face. Now, I posted a video about a exclusive interview that happened on CTV between Vashi and a expelled diplomat from India earlier this morning. And I might have gotten the messaging wrong, but I also did say that earlier this morning I was extremely hungover. So I very much apologize for that. But upon reflection, we're here to take a look at the situation again from a different perspective with new information. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video, everybody. Before we get into it, I do encourage y'all to smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It does really help grow the channel. Now, you may or may not be aware, but India has really been going after Justin Trudeau because of the allegations that Justin Trudeau has come out with, saying India has, assassinated Najar Singh, who's a Canadian, but not really Canadian because he was listed as a terrorist in India and he illegally immigrated here. It's all very murky waters. And a lot of Canadians are saying, yeah, no, that guy shouldn't have been here. He didn't belong. He was a bad guy and we don't know what the hell happened. And the government should have, been complicit with or complied with India's request to, send him back to India because he was listed as a terrorist. And now India news is just flooding everywhere with pretty much the same rhetoric. Trudeau is an idiot. The Canadian government is in shambles, and everyone is waiting very, very patiently while tapping their hands and their feet, saying we want an election immediately. So let's take a look at some of this media here from India that's just really going after Trudeau, and then we're going to take a look at a new interview that just happened where an ex-CSIS, I believe it's director, talks about the situation.
This timing may look pretty bad because Trudeau is already facing a party rebellion. He leads the Liberal Party. They have lost key by-elections in Canada, so some party leaders want a change in leadership. Reports say 20 members of parliament are on board. They have signed a letter asking Justin Trudeau to step aside to get in new blood. And now the Canadian media is on his case. So it may look like bad timing, but perhaps that is the idea. Just think about it. What's the more interesting story? Liberal backbenchers trying to oust Trudeau or an international diplomatic scandal? The answer is obvious. Trudeau has managed to shift the focus from himself to India. We saw that during his press conference. Reporters asked him about the party rebellion. Look at how he shut them down.
There will be time to talk about internal party intrigue at another moment. But right now, this government, and indeed all parliamentarians, should be focused on standing up for Canada's sovereignty, standing against interference, and looking to be there to support Canadians in this difficult moment.
In the short run, this may work. Perhaps the headlines will shift, but one fight with India will not fix Justin Trudeau's problems. Just look at the opinion polls. The opposition Conservative Party is at 42%. Trudeau's Liberals are at 23%. Now, opinion polls can go wrong, but a 20% difference rarely does, which is why the opposition is being cautious. They are not lining up behind Trudeau. They know what the strategy is, to portray Justin Trudeau as some sort of savior, as the defender of Canadian citizens. And the opposition is not falling for that trap, especially Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. He's pretty active on social media, but on this issue,
very active.
He did not issue a statement directly. Instead, he posted a statement via his party. Plus, no press conferences either. No calls for sanctions or punitive actions. So Trudeau's plan appears to be backfiring. If anything, Canadians are learning more about Khalistani gangs, about what they stand for, what their past is, and what their goal is. It's clearly not what Justin Trudeau expected. He thought Canadians would close ranks behind him. Instead, they're asking questions like, where is your evidence? What will be the cost of your standoff with India? It's very different to the situation here because while India is protecting its sovereignty and territorial integrity, Trudeau is fighting for his political survival.
Yeah, not very good for Justin Trudeau. And now with all these new, allegations and accusations that are coming out directed specifically at the Indian government, it's really not good. And then you add on, the fact that diplomats are now coming on to, mainstream media in Canada to kind of talk about what's going on. And then it's just, the whole dynamic is insane. The fact that this is all public and not being dealt with behind closed doors, I understand for transparency's sake. I do appreciate that, but not when it comes to this. I feel like this is not a good approach to attack another country. And we haven't seen any of these sources, right? The whole, we've confirmed that India did this. Okay, what are the sources, right? There hasn't been any mention of sources. The main source is Trudeau saying, "Trust me, bro." And then, I mean, the fact that we were harboring an Indian terrorist, it doesn't make any sense, right? So let's take a look now at an ex-CSIS officer who calls Indian allegations most shocking assault on our sovereignty. Here we go.
Been yet another wild week on Parliament Hill, with the Prime Minister claiming in his testimony that he says he knows of Conservative members of Parliament who are under threat of foreign interference. Here's what Justin Trudeau said on Wednesday.
I have the names of a number of parliamentarians, former parliamentarians and/or candidates in the Conservative Party of Canada who are engaged or at high risk of, or for whom there is clear intelligence around foreign interference.
But that quickly became partisan, with Trudeau criticizing Pierre Poilievre's refusal to get the top secret security clearance that would allow him to learn the names of those Conservative MPs.
And it is so egregious to me that the leader of the official opposition, who is certainly trying very hard to become Prime Minister, is choosing to play partisan games with foreign interference.
The opposition leader quickly released a statement calling the Prime Minister a liar. All this as more Liberal cabinet ministers pull their names out of the running for the next election. To help break all this down, we're joined by the Globe and Mail's Stephanie Levitz. On the security side, we are joined by Dan Stanton, former CSIS intelligence officer. This has been quite a week, Steph. Let's start with you, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what's happening with Justin Trudeau's leadership, and then bring Dan in on the security side. Eddie Goldenberg, former senior advisor to Jean Chrétien, writing a letter saying, for the good of Canada, Justin Trudeau needs to step down. Pretty strong words. This growing caucus revolt, questions about whether or not he's going to be confronted on Tuesday. Is the tone changing, and is he closer to being pushed out?
I guess the question has to be, will he allow himself to be pushed out? Because we have to remember a couple of things. The caucus members that are upset with him, and I would suggest that, there's an idea that there's this letter going around, everyone's going to sign it. Everyone's probably not going to sign it. But it is certain, I think, that the sentiment in caucus is that something needs to change, and that something is him. But they have no mechanism to push him out. They have only the power of persuasion. And at this moment in time, one wonders, can he counter that? Can he neutralize it? Can he dangle a cabinet position? As you've mentioned, we now have these open cabinet spots that could be a factor. Can he punt this down the line? Ultimately, at the end of the day, whether Mr. Trudeau chooses to stay or go, I know it sort of sounds simplistic. It is up to Mr. Trudeau. Because at this moment in time, what we don't have, and I'll say at this moment in time, what we don't have are, for example, cabinet ministers putting their name to, no, he's got to go. We have only a handful of members of parliament willing to be named as saying he has to go. So right now this pressure exists in the back room. Will it abate? I doubt it. But can he hold it off long enough to insert multiple options here? Perhaps.
Is there a clear contender if he does step aside?
I think that's one of the reasons you're not seeing a lot of people putting their names to this idea that he has to go, because there is no one person they are coalescing around. This is not a replay of the Chrétien-Martin War, where it was a very clear two camps or bust situation. There are numerous people who've mused about wanting to run for leadership. None of them thus far have publicly come out and said the Prime Minister has to go. They're all in cabinet. That could be a reason. But without caucus really uniting around another person, like if I could draw a parallel, if you'll permit me just quickly, between when Andrew Scheer was kicked out or was forced to leave as Conservative leader versus when Aaron O'Toole was forced to leave as Conservative leader. And they were two very different scenarios in which Andrew Scheer actually had a lot of caucus members on side. There was no suggestion that this is going to be the next leader. We want him out in favor of this person. So that unspooled quite differently than Aaron O'Toole, it was pretty clear at the moment in time in which he was finally told to go, Pierre Poilievre was going to be the guy, and a lot of people were in support of that. That instance moved fast. It was swift. The leadership race was called immediately. Pierre Poilievre announced immediately. It was very clean. I think what's happening with Mr. Trudeau is more like what has happened to Andrew Scheer. There is no clear contender. And absent that, people aren't necessarily willing to take the leap.
One of the things that we saw Justin Trudeau do last week, which a lot of folks interpreted as part of him being under pressure, was his testimony at the foreign interference inquiry. We've been waiting for this for a couple of years now to finally hear him testify under oath. And he shocked a lot of people, Dan. You were there, you were in the room when, instead of starting out with what they knew, when they knew it, what they'd done about it, he pointed at the Conservatives and said, in fact, I have intelligence that they are compromised and they're the ones who need to worry, and Pierre Poilievre won't get his security screening so that he can have top secret classified briefings. What did you make of that?
Well, I was there, and it was entertaining. I was representing the Pillar Society. The Prime Minister was doing a good job, lots of stick handling, and then, yeah, he turned the tables on the Conservatives. A lot of people expected the Commission was just going to be focused on China and the Liberal Party, but there are surprises, and non-surprisingly, India did come up. But it certainly was a partisan moment, and it certainly shone the light on the opposition. And of course, then the whole issue of briefing, being read in, having a clearance came up.
So let me ask you that question. Does Pierre Poilievre need to get a clearance to be able to be briefed that way? He says as Chief of Staff.
So, what she's about to say is the Chief of Staff has been briefed, and there's nothing that's ever been concerning or noteworthy that would escalate, Pierre needing to get the security clearance. This has already, 100% been cleared.
Has one. Is that sufficient? And is it true that if he had that information, he couldn't talk about it?
No. The leader of the opposition needs to get the clearance, needs to be briefed. And the Chief of Staff...
Nah, shut the hell up. Your eyes are too close to each other, man. This is crazy, dude. The previous leader of the NDP, Tom Mulcair, almost once Prime Minister of Canada, the previous Jagmeet Singh of the world, right? The shit stain of politics. He said that there is no need for Pierre Poilievre to get the security clearance. It would, in fact, muzzle him. Every time Jagmeet Singh talks about foreign interference, he always quotes the publicly available version that is highly redacted. This is crazy. It hasn't given him an advantage at all to do anything. He hasn't taken any action. There's nothing that he can talk about. So ipso de facto, it silences him. It muzzles him. The only person that has been very transparent about this is Tom Mulcair, which I don't think we agree with him 99% of the time, but on that one point, he actually brings common sense to the table, unlike this guy here.
Can't tell anybody that. He's probably going to be walking around Ottawa with these secrets, but he can't reveal it. So it's up to the leader to have been read into this so that they can then make decisions what to do with perhaps some members of the party that might at some time be in a position of power. He needs to get that clearance and he needs to read it.
So, Steph, what's his political calculation here on why he doesn't want to get it? Because it's feeding a lot of online conspiracy theories.
It absolutely is. But also we could make the point, who is the most senior person in this country? The Prime Minister. Who has the power to declassify whatever information he would like to declassify whenever he would like to declassify it? The Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister was really truly worried about national security in this instance, if it was an issue that rose to the level that it needed to be shared, the Prime Minister could walk out of his home at Rideau Gate, go down the street in Rockcliffe, ring the doorbell at Stornoway where Pierre Poilievre lives, and just tell him. And because of that, we end up in this awful situation where partisan politics, partisan hay on both sides is being made out of a national security issue, not to mention the fact that it's unfairly tarnishing MPs. Mm-hmm. There is now this inference here that there are MPs that are traitors to this country. And let's be honest, we're not looking at every single MP thinking they're a traitor. We're looking at MPs of particular ethnic backgrounds, of particular cultural communities, because so much of this conversation is about specific countries. It's dangerous. It's dangerous to the national fabric. And Pierre Poilievre's not helping it. I'm not trying to excuse the way he's approaching it. But it is factually true that the Prime Minister could just tell him.
Well, and it's, you know, some would say indicative of the sophomoric national security culture that we have in this country. Then in the U.S., they have very serious bipartisan committees that take on national security issues, and they don't just use them to advance their partisan interests. And watching this play out, you know, Dan, I feel like looking at this, and I'd like your take on it, but I feel like I don't have answers now about how serious this is, or who's involved, or how many people, or to what degree. What effect does that have on our adversaries, too, being able to exploit that pulling apart of society? We need accountability. We need to know what's going on, but we now also have this vacuum of inference on both sides.
Well, that's exactly what's happened. I mean, you know, the inquiry by definition was in some ways inherently political. I mean, there was pressure to call it, belief of Chinese interference disadvantaging the opposition. But what we're seeing now is it is somewhat a politicized process that's emerged, where partisanship is kind of leading things. I think what we're going to find at the end of the day is that these MPs may very well not have been, as Stephanie says, traitors. Some may have exercised poor judgment, some may have had a witting, semi-witting relationship with something, but in terms of national security, it may not be the end of the world, and it may not be any different than a party leader basically vetting their own staff.
Can they just release the names publicly?
No, it can't. You've got sources, you've got methodologies. It's going to put it's going to, I guess you could say, shake up sources in other operations, thinking that someday their information is going to be disclosed. So it should be radio silence on those names.
There was, of course, this explosive story that came out on Thanksgiving Monday, almost a week ago, that the RCMP say they have criminal evidence, not just intelligence, but evidence that people linked to the Indian government, including their most senior diplomat who was here in Canada, were involved in a scheme of surveilling Canadian citizens, passing that information to others, and then hiring criminal gangs to carry out violent acts, including drive-by shootings, assassinations, home invasions. Really shocking stuff that we were hearing. Steph, a lot of people were suspicious about the timing of this. Now, I've talked to some senior national security sources who insist that this was underway long before that, but how does it play out for the Trudeau government? Did it help to give credibility for something that they had been so heavily criticized for talking about in public a year ago when they first said, look, a Canadian citizen has been assassinated by an Indian government agent or by the hire of an Indian government agent?
I think it's really unfortunate, Mercedes, that we have found ourselves at a point in our national security discourse where it is almost impossible not to see partisan self-interest on the part of the government whenever they do anything at all. Because I am not disputing the facts that the RCMP had. I am not, you know, this is serious stuff. We can see, of course, as well, that the United States has subsequently followed with arrest and action of their own. So they're, you know, a cross-border work on this. It's not existing in a vacuum. It's just exceptionally difficult to parse the two, right? To say that, oh no, this had to happen exactly when it happened, and oh, if there's a political benefit to the Prime Minister, great. You know, I don't see it that way, and I think that that's part of governance, frankly. Part of governance, and you know, people in Stephen Harper's government would say this too, any partisan government would say, you look at things through two lenses. You just always do. What is the partisan downside or upside to making this decision when I make it? Does it smack of this idea? I think the risk here that we get into is it looks like political direction for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. That's dangerous stuff. Because if there's that inference, if there's that idea that the commissioner is not independent and is sitting there waiting to announce something when it's politically advantageous for the boss, I don't think we want to live in an environment where the politicians are telling the cops what to do.
And I think that's the challenge of the credibility here. I mean, the RCMP were on a flight before I think Justin Trudeau even knew about this brewing uprising. So the timing was separate from that. But Dan, how serious is this national security threat? I mean, I can't remember hearing about something this sophisticated that allegedly goes as high up in the Indian government as our national security sources.
Mercedes, this is unquestionably the most egregious assault on our sovereignty, on public safety that I've ever seen, heard, or read. You cannot make this stuff up. The Indian government was using their embassy and consulates as a command and control center to manage and plan serious crimes, homicides, violence, arson, extortion, list of activities to create the illusion that Canada is being overrun by criminal gangs and terrorists of a South Asian background. This is terrible. This is awful, and Canada has to push back.
Lots more to talk about on this, I'm sure. Stunning.
I think that most Canadians want the relationship between both countries to be a little bit more civil and a little bit better. It's never good when you have two democracies attacking each other in the way that they have been. I think that Canada has thrown a lot of mud at like specifically our government, right? Obviously has thrown a lot of mud at the Indian government. I'm not saying that India hasn't, done some shady things here in Canada. That may be possible, that may not be possible. But at the same time, Canada was harboring an Indian terrorist that India, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, wanted that person back in India to serve time as said terrorist, right? Face the law to its whatever extent, and Canada didn't comply. Now, does that make it okay for India the government to infiltrate Canada and pull off some form of assassination? No, I don't think anyone would say that that's okay. But I think there's a bigger question at hand, and it's like, hey, okay, well, we got to that point, which is not okay, but could it have been avoided? And what are we doing now to mend the relationships? Because it's not being mended. I'll tell you that for free. It's absolutely not being mended. Justin Trudeau is making things significantly worse every single day. So that's my opinion, and I would love to know yours. But this is the end of the video, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. On your way out, if you haven't yet already, I'd like to encourage you guys to smash the like button and subscribe to this channel. It does really help it grow, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.